Alright, Bruchim Aboyim, welcome everyone. Driving a little different car, so my face is kind of cut off in the bottom here. More answers for Quora. This question is, how do Jews see Jesus? So, quite often Jews like to answer a question with a question. That's something that goes actually back to the Bible, very common in the Talmud as well. So, the following question I would have is, how do Christians view Muhammad? Or how do Christians view Joseph Smith? And that's the answer. For the most part, to be honest, Jesus is not on our radar as Jews. We don't really know much about him. All we know about Jesus is what the Christians record about him. And so, there's probably a lot more knowledge available about Joseph Smith than about Jesus. For most Christians, Joseph Smith is just not on the radar. I don't see most Christian apologetics being concerned with the LDS Church, unless they're actively involved with a mission with a mission concerning that church. Similarly, really, most Christian apologetics are not that concerned about Islam and trying to somehow, make an apologetic argument disproving Islam or disproving the doctrines of the LDS Church. On the other hand, a lot more Christian apologetics are concerned with Judaism and Jews in one way or the other, and how to reconcile the continued existence of the Jewish religion in the Christian era. And there are many different ways that they approach it. But the fact of the matter is, Christianity cannot ignore Judaism, because, as Pastor John Hagee often says, Judaism could exist perfectly fine without Christianity, but Christianity could not exist without Judaism. And so again, for the Muslim, Judaism and Christianity are certainly on their radar. It's something that they have to discuss in their apologetics. And for members of the LDS Church who self-identify as Christians, but most other, certainly Nicene Creed affirming Christians would not accept members of the LDS Church as such. Also, there's a lot of interest in Judaism and in the books of mainstream Christianity. So, it's not, but it doesn't generally go the other way. Meaning most Jews are not walking around trying to think of apologetic arguments. Why don't we believe? What justification do we have that we do not accept Jesus? Because it's just not on our radar. Now, there are polemics that came about later that either clearly are a reference to Christianity or are not clearly a reference to Christianity, and some people have claimed are as such, which are post-Christian in nature, but from ancient times. Certainly the later ones don't view that in such a positive realm, mostly because because Jews suffered so much under Christians, just as Jews suffered under Muslims. At different times in history, it was better, it was worse. Certainly there were times in history where Jews lived better under Christians than under Muslims, and there were times in history where Jews lived under Muslims better than under Christians. And there's a lot of discussion with that. Maimonides was certainly considered to be not only a great teacher of Jewish law, but a great teacher of Jewish philosophy. And in his law books, he basically says that Christianity and Islam serve to bring the world toward the eventual culmination that we're looking forward to, that the Bible predicts, that all people will worship the God of the Bible. And so he mentions there the persecution that Jews suffer under people who profess those religions. And he's writing this in the 1200s of the Christian era. It's about 800 years ago. But he says, despite that, for the Gentile world, Christianity and Islam are a big improvement. They've made the world a better place. And I often say, even for the people who did not embrace those religions and still maintain some pagan form of worship, a lot of those people changed their behavior because of really essentially Jewish ideas that were spread to the world through Christianity and Islam. And so the example that I like to point out was a video that was on PragerU that said in colonial India there was I'm trying to remember the name of the fellow. Something tells me something like Arthur Treacher, like it was the same name as an actor or someone, but I don't think that's the name. But that there was a colonial governor in India from England, obviously a Christian. I'm assuming an Anglican, and he told the Brahmin priests that we will respect your tradition of suti, of burning innocent widows, killing them, murdering them, if you respect our tradition of hanging men who murder innocent widows and other innocent people. And for the most part, that practice of suti, except maybe in some small pockets of rural India, could still be around to this day in small pockets, but for the most part, that practice is extinct. It might be totally extinct, I'm not sure, I don't know. And so that is essentially, what we would call one of the 7 laws of Noah, thou shalt not murder, part of the 10 commandments as well, that spread to the world through Christianity. And so even if those groups might not have accepted thou shalt have no other gods before me or in my presence, however you want to translate that, because translating those things have two different ways of understanding. Nonetheless, the world is a much better place because of the spread of Jewish ideas through Christianity and Islam. And the truth is, it's the same thing with Islam. If you look at how the pagan Arabs lived before Muhammad and the revolution that he brought, the reforms that he brought to the world, it's a much better place. Same thing I mentioned, a much smaller religion, the LDS Church, although very fast, growing religion. They're just wonderful, nice, good people. And so their theology may be very flawed from a Jewish perspective or a Muslim perspective or even a mainstream Christian perspective. But nonetheless, let's look at the fruits of what they have produced. They're good, nice people, as are most Christians and most Muslims and most everybody in the world. And people just struggle with issues that that they're dealing with. But nonetheless, most people, would like to be better than they are. And we recognize that basic human nature is neither good nor evil, and that there's certainly a pull toward both in human nature, but that we should choose life and choose blessing, choose the right way to live. And so a later rabbinical authority was Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who lived in the 1700s in the Netherlands. And Rabbi Emden was a great rabbi of that time. He actually was very interesting. His big fight was against a Jewish cult that from the 1600s, from about 100 years before his time, a little earlier, 70, 80 years before his time, that believed in a false messiah named Shabtai Tzvi, who came out of Turkey and actually convinced a great deal of the Jewish people that he either was or could be the Messiah, until he started to do some strange things in violation of Jewish law, and then eventually convert to Islam. And the question was, what happened with him, with his followers, and many of them stayed followers of it, a small group, and it was growing, and it was also trying to attract Christians to join that cult. And so Rabbi Emden, very interestingly, wrote the following letter to the Christian, an open letter to the Christian community. And he said, "Stay with your Messiah, Jesus, because Jesus and the church spread Torah, the basic ideas of Torah, more than anyone else in the world. Even if, from our perspective, it's not in a perfect sense, but nonetheless, those basic ideas spread to the world, and that's a good thing." And so therefore he said, Christians, stick with Christianity and don't be tempted to follow this false messiah of Shabtai Tzvi. And that's a very interesting approach. Some people question whether he actually wrote that or not, Rabbi Emden. Some people suggest it might be a later, some kind of a forgery or something. But for the most part, it's accepted that it's authentic. Maybe not everyone agrees, but it's hard not to agree with it in the basic way. And a very interesting thing that he points out was that the argument in the book of Acts concerning the Council of Jerusalem, and the question was essentially the way Rabbi Emden read that, and it's interesting that Rabbi Emden was read in the books of the Christian Bible that Christians call the New Testament. And he said, as a rabbi and as a Jew, the way he's reading that discussion between Paul and essentially Peter and James and others was as follows: that Peter and James essentially looked at the question of being a follower of Jesus as saying, well, if you want to follow Jesus, you have to convert to Judaism. And Paul said, no, you don't have to convert to Judaism. And the way in the Pauline epistles is expressed was the question of circumcision as an outward sign of conversion to Judaism, and as Paul said, that means that you're bound by all of the law. If you are, meaning you're not born Jewish, and you circumcise, then you're bound by the law. And he phrased it in somewhat, from a Jewish perspective, in a distasteful way. But the truth of the matter is, most people today who come to convert to Judaism, most of the rabbis kind of approach it in a Pauline type of way of saying, you don't really have to do this. Why do you want to do this? And so, which is not exactly the consensus of Jewish thought and Jewish law, is that that's how we're supposed to approach conversion. But that is the contemporary and seems like somewhat for a long time approach. Always was one of the opinions, just like there were a lot of disagreements in Jewish law. Excuse me, all throughout Jewish history. So it's kind of a similar approach of that question. So in any event, there are obviously other opinions that are somewhat more negative, and certainly you can very easily find a lot of apologists who do focus, particularly because of the missionary issue, that there's a lot of work of apologetics to disprove Christian claims that Judaism points to Christianity. And that's really the main focus of a lot of these apologists. And they're pretty well known. It's not that they have a goal of taking Christians away from Christianity, although sometimes that's what happens, but it's more of the goal of, first and foremost, disproving the Christian claims that, Isaiah 53 is, I remember, talking to, I work as a prison chaplain, and I try to be respectful of all religions in my professional capacity. And I was sitting with a group of Christians, and we were having a Bible lesson together because the pastor was absent. And it was interesting because it was a passage in the book of Joel that is quoted in the book of Acts that they were studying at the time. And so I said, I can give a brief lesson on that book of Joel and give some insights that are not theological, that are not in any way threatening to Christianity, totally respectful. And I remember one of the inmates, immediately, in the middle of and randomly turned to Isaiah 53 and said, well, basically, you don't really believe in Isaiah if you don't accept that Isaiah 53 is talking about Jesus, because it's so obvious. And I said, respectfully, we have very strong apologetics why that's not the case. But I'm not here to argue with you. I came here to share something that we have in common, and one of the men there who is kind of an inmate facilitator of sorts. He so let's just be respectful and thankful for what he's sharing. So I don't want to dismantle Christianity for Christians. I don't want to dismantle Islam for Muslims. I recognize we live in an imperfect world. And so, as much as I believe with all my heart And I find the apologetics of Judaism to be the most convincing, at least to me. I'm not seeking to change anybody else for anything. The same thing if I'm dealing with a Buddhist, a Hindu, someone who practices Native American spirituality, someone who practices Wicca or Norse paganism or any of the other religions, Rastafarianism, Santeria, and all the various religions that we serve in the prison system. It's not my job to dismantle those in any way. It's my job to try to help that their religious rights are being protected and try to get them out of prison better than they got in there. And if Christianity helps them with that, wonderful. If Islam helps them with that, wonderful. If Judaism helps them with that, wonderful. If Wicca or Native American spirituality or Norse paganism or whatever it is, all these various religions that they practice, if that's what helps them with that, wonderful. Because I work for the state and I have to treat everyone the same, no matter what my own personal views are. But my own personal views, for the most part, are that there is good in all of these religions. In the Bible, it says, Book of Malachi, chapter 1:11, from the rising of the sun setting to the setting thereof, great is my name among the nations, says the Lord of hosts. Malachi, in the name of the Almighty God, was the creator of heaven and earth, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, was rebuking the Jewish priests in the temple in Jerusalem for thinking, oh, they're hot stuff because they got the real religion in God's temple in Jerusalem. And Malachi had to tell them, you know what, every pagan who just doesn't know any better and was never taught, who is a good person and doesn't, take advantage of the poor and the widow, etc. I mean, you can read that passage in Malachi. They're just as good as you religiously. They're offering a pure offering, mostly just because they don't know any better. So don't think you're better than anybody else because of your religion. And I remember on the radio, I think it was WABC, there was a story about an atheist who had a near-death experience, and an angel was walking him around in heaven. So now that he saw that, from what he experienced, what he saw, well, he was wrong to be an atheist. So he asked the angel, well, then what's the right religion? What's the true religion? And he expected, they're going to say, the Eastern branch of Presbyterian or whatever. I don't know. And then the angel told him, and again, I'm not saying that this is exactly right or true, but it's a beautiful idea. He said, that's not the right question, because there are good people in bad religion and bad people in good religion. And I think that's kind of what Malachi is saying there. If you're a good person and you were just brought up in this bad religion, but you're not doing the bad parts of the religion, you're not, sacrificing human beings, you're not doing all kinds of really evil, disgusting things. Well, all right, your theology is a little bit messed up. Kind of like what I said about, and again, from our perspective, with all due respect to members of LDS Church, I don't, just from our perspective, we obviously have very different theologies. If you happen to be watching, you're a member of that church, I don't have any hatred against you because we disagree theologically, So, but I also don't think you're going to hell just because you have the wrong type of theology. From our perspective, the theology that we have, especially you study Maimonides and his discussions of theology. It's just a common sense theology, that what we teach, and theologically it's not any different than what Muslims teach. Christianity, though, it's a different theology, but we can, it's in one sense it's a little bit easier to understand that. In another sense, might be a little bit easier to understand the LDS theology that's different than the Nicene Trinitarian Christian theology. And what do all of these things mean, and how did certainly the Jehovah's Witnesses theology is something that's much more, in line with maybe certain mystical types of Judaism. We still don't believe in Jesus, right? But the LDS idea that the Messiah is, not the LDS idea, the Jehovah's Witnesses idea that the Messiah is an incarnation of Archangel Michael and not of the Creator, kind of goes along with certain Jewish teachings that they're maybe not mainstream or normative. The more mainstream normative idea of Judaism is that the Messiah is just a human being and he'll be a king like David or Solomon or Hezekiah. But there are mystical ideas that the Messiah is an incarnation of or that the soul of the Messiah is rooted in the angel Metatron, which is also connected to Enoch, and there's all these interesting things that go on there. And the thing is that from a Jewish perspective, all that stuff doesn't really matter that much. We have 13 dogmas. Some people question whether you should use that word dogma. I think it's apt because my teachers, especially Rabbi Blitzky of blessed memory, taught that, yes, the 13 principles of faith are the dogmas of Orthodox Judaism. And the only argument between the Rambam and the Sefer Ikrim are which are the dogmas, which are not. But we are a dogmatic religion. But we have very, very few dogmas. We don't have the whole Baltimore Catechism as dogmas. We have plenty of different beliefs that are kosher, different opinions. So, question a lot of people like to ask is about reincarnation and this and that. The resurrection is a dogma, but reincarnation is not. It's an opinion, but it's almost universally accepted in most Orthodox circles. Things like that. I'm getting way off topic here. But still, with all that being said, just because, all right, that is what, let's say you mentioned the Jehovah's Witnesses, that their idea is quote unquote more kosher, doesn't make it kosher. The Kutzker said, a 99% truth and 1% lie is still 100% lie. So, but the question is, how do we deal with that when we're in a fallen world, when we're in an imperfect world? As much as we disagree with the Christian idea of original sin, doesn't mean that we don't have an idea of original sin. We certainly have an archetypical idea of original sin, but it's not, again, in that dogmatic sense that Christians have it. And also it's not in the damnation sense. It's just that, all right, we're mortals and the world is not perfect. We're in exile, and these are ideas that are, part of our eschatology and so forth. But like we said at the beginning, we don't know anything about Jesus. Just, meaning from a Jewish perspective, we know about things if we have a Masorah. If we have, similar to how the Catholics and the Orthodox would talk about apostolic succession, we have our Masorah, Mahavta. And with that being said, losing this thing again. So, and in a certain way, I always say, the Catholics and the Orthodox Christians, they have something that the Protestants don't have, right? Even though the Protestants are trying to get to what the core was, or then you have the line of blood Baptists who claim something similar. but nonetheless, when you try to make some restorationism, unless you have, in a certain sense, like the LDS Church claims, well, they have a prophet, right? And they have prophets to today. The problem with saying they have a prophet is what we just read in our liturgical reading yesterday in the synagogue, is that in Deuteronomy it says the Torah is not in heaven, Mo b'shamayim. Meaning, even if a prophet comes and says, this is what God says, and it's in violation of what was revealed at Sinai, and in violation of our traditions, it's nothing. So the same thing in Christianity. I mean, the Protestants don't even claim that, right? Except those who believe in personal revelation. And even that's a big issue. But, it's theologically, from a traditional Jewish perspective, there is a little bit and again, it's not, because on the other hand, theologically, and when you look at the traditional churches, they certainly seem a lot more pagan, right, than Protestant churches, although some of the Protestant churches just seem like a concert or something. I don't know. It doesn't really seem like church, some of them. Which again, all right, so you have certain Jewish places, it's just like a Koksitz or something, whatever. But so the question is, how do we balance these things? And the answer is, from our perspective, it's just not on our radar, right? But for someone to come along, like for example, there's different movements within Judaism, within Christianity, and the interface between Christianity and Judaism. And I would say even to a certain point within Judaism, and there are these movements that are called the Messianic movements, right? Which are, and my general approach is as follows: the ones who are not following in any sense our traditions are totally Christian, even if they are some sort of Neo-Sadducee or Neo-Karaite mixing with Christianity. They're just Christian. And certainly if they're Trinitarian and so forth. But then you have certain groups, which are pretty small groups, that are pretty much either close to Orthodox Judaism or like totally Orthodox, that are kind of more like certain Jewish groups, particularly Chabad, that have, a Messiah issue. And so those groups are, even though from my perspective they're wrong, they're not heretical, they're not idolatrous, they're just wrong. And with, saying Jesus was some kind of a Tana or whatever it was. But there's still, and I know some people don't like this, but I'll say it, and some of my Rebbeim will, support me on this. Those are, if they're someone who's Shomer Torah mitzvahs, they're still our brothers and sisters. Not everything that's wrong is heretical. And the same thing I'll say about Chabad. I think they're wrong, and I think a lot of the tactics that they use, particularly the way they handle a lot of things, even though I love them and I respect them, I think they do a lot of things that make me uncomfortable beyond just the eschatological issues. But doesn't make them heretics. And a heretic is not part of the Klal Yisrael. Doesn't make them a Gentile, but they're not really part of the Jewish community if they embrace heresy or apostasy. It's not apostasy in the Jewish perspective, for someone to be an observant Jew, totally observant, but also believes that Jesus was some kind of a good teacher or even some kind of a messianic figure. Not really sure how to, that type of thing, as long as you're not praying to him as a god, or as God or whatever it is. But it's still wrong from a Jewish perspective, And the main reason why it's wrong is that we have no Masorah for that. We have no way of knowing. All right, so you want to claim, all right, so this guy, he was the angel Metatron who came down and all these things. Where do you get that from? What Masorah do you have to link that? What connection? How do you come to that? And it always just kind of goes back to, well, the Protestant churches said that, and where the Protestant churches get it from the Catholic Church. So, but they're protesting the Catholic Church, but so much of what they embrace is very clearly Catholic tradition. And one of the things I always like to point out, for example, is like the whole story of the fall of Lucifer. How many Protestants, they see, it says this here in Isaiah, and this is talking about, and then they have the whole story. And I was like, that's essentially a Catholic homily. That's not what the scripture is actually saying, but that's a homiletical exegesis of the text. And if you're claiming sola scriptura, you're kind of being a hypocrite by saying this is what the text is saying, because it's not what the text is saying. This is how you're interpreting the text. This is how the church interprets the text, which is fine. I don't have an issue with that. It's not how we interpret the text, but you have every right to interpret it in your religion the way your religion wants to interpret it. But don't go tell us that our interpretation is wrong from a Jewish perspective, because we know the Hebrew, we know what it says, and also we have our traditions, and the way I usually say is, all right, from the Christian perspective, that's what it means, and then from the Jewish perspective, this is how we look at it, and that's all it is. So I've gone on way too long, but essentially that's my answer to sum up the whole question. When a Christian asks me, how do we look at Jesus, my answer is just, how do you look at Joseph Smith? How do you look at Muhammad? Not really on your radar. That's essentially the way that it is. It's not something that's a big question for the average Christian, and so the same thing, the average Jew isn't walking around thinking, why don't we believe in Jesus? Or even, why don't we celebrate Christmas, which I think, might be a bigger question for most people, because I think a lot of people are more interested, I'm saying the average American is more interested in Christmas than in Jesus, right? And like, you don't celebrate Christmas, but you have Hanukkah, and like, so is that like a Jewish Christmas? And like, No, and then you have that reaction of saying, well, Hanukkah, it's not really that big of a deal. Well, it is. A lot of folks like to say, oh, Hanukkah is just a minor holiday. No, it's a major holiday in a minor key is kind of the way I like to say it. It's a major. It's one of the two major rabbinical holidays. We do have major. We don't really have major holidays and minor holidays in that sense. But Hanukkah, the liturgical aspects of Hanukkah do present it as somewhat of a major holiday. We say Hallel, the full Hallel. We have Torah reading every day, and of course the main mitzvah of lighting the candles. So it is, and I'll explain. I guess those words I just used. Hallel is Psalms 113 through 118 that are recited on holidays. Not all holidays. It's not recited on Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, or Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, or on Purim. I don't know how you translate Purim, the Feast of Lots. The Bible just calls it Purim, even in the English translations, right? And then we have what's going on here. So Hanukkah, I guess, would be the Feast of Dedication. Mitzvah means a commandment, but it could also refer to rabbinical commandments because the book of Deuteronomy says to follow the teachings of the authorities. And Torah reading is meaning in a liturgical sense. We do pray 3 times a day in the synagogue. We have daily liturgy. And on certain days, part of the liturgy is we take out a scroll that has the first 5 books of the Bible and read portions publicly. And with that being said, that doesn't happen every day. It happens every Saturday, twice, in the morning and the afternoon. It happens on every Monday and Thursday in the morning. It happens on fast days in the morning and the afternoon. It happens on various days, and every holiday, including the new moon, which I guess would be the minor holiday type of a thing. We also say those Psalms, the Hallel, but not all of them. We leave out some verses on those days liturgically. But in any event, the fact that Hanukkah has those aspects shows that it's not nothing. It's not, again, not to put it down, Tu B'Shvat or Lag Bomer. Tu B'Shvat, they kind of say, is like Arbor Day, and some people make a big deal about it, and some people don't. Anyway, I've gone on way, way too long. But I think, this is a good discussion. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment. But the basic thing is mainstream normative Judaism doesn't really care about Jesus, but we certainly are going to defend if someone is trying to tell us, oh, Isaiah 53 is definitely talking about Jesus. From our perspective, it's not. But if you as Christians want to believe that, that's fine for you. Or whatever other passages. You want to hear our explanations, why not? All right, we could talk about that. But it's not even, from the mainstream Jewish perspective, it's not even like something that's important enough to talk about. Because it's just not not part of our, it's not on our radar. You know, that's the way, you know, that I would express myself with that. It's just not on our radar. And again, I think that's the perfect analogy. Just like Joseph Smith is not on the radar of the average Christian, Muhammad is not on the radar of the average Christian. And I'm not saying that we necessarily look at Jesus in a negative sense, although certainly there are polemic literature that would do so, but I tend to explain that in the historical context of, well, you know, we're being attacked by people who claim to follow this man. Polemics sometimes get kind of nasty, especially in a defensive way, and doesn't necessarily have to be interpreted in that way. And also, a lot of these are all homilies. These aren't law. These aren't doctrine, the way I've seen some people claim. You know, and I saw one YouTuber who said, you know, compared the hurt feelings from a polemical fictional account, historical fiction, to millennia of bloodshed. It's not quite even. I don't like to bring that up personally. I'm just quoting that YouTuber. It's not a rabbi, and I don't think is even a believer. I think she's an atheist. But she's connecting to our books in her way, and I see some value in that. But I feel that that's disrespectful to bring up, especially now that almost every Christian church has sought to make amends. And I know a lot of people are suspicious of that, like, well, because they want to convert us. You know, if you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. You know, and all right, I hear, I see what you're saying. But in any event, it's not nice, you know. One of my teachers, he tells a story that when he became a rabbi in a synagogue out on Long Island, the local Catholic priest sought to befriend him, and they became very good friends. And you know, the rabbi, coming from Israel, living in Israel for 17 years, and not really having much interaction with Christians, said that, you know, he started to talk to the priest, who's now Monsignor, about, you know, the whole history of the persecution of the Jews by the church. And the priest answered, you know, Jeff, that's all in the past, and, you know, we feel bad about that stuff. But what about now? You know, how do we deal with these things now? And it kind of changed his perspective on that. Now me, and I come from a background where my father was Roman Catholic, and my in-laws were from the LDS Church. I just try to look at things on a personal level. I don't like to collectivize, and I'm very, very American in that sense that I believe in the rugged individualism that's somewhat classical liberal / libertarian in nature, of looking at individual liberties, and so thus also looking at individual human beings first and foremost, and just trying to make the relationships on the personal level. And so when I work with Christian clergy, Muslim clergy, pagan clergy, Native American clergy, etc., in my work in prison chaplaincy and with the men that we're serving who are incarcerated, I look at that on the individual level. It doesn't even cross my mind on a day-to-day basis. Oh, you remember the Crusades or the Spanish Inquisition? Like, I don't know. I mean, Spanish Inquisition. It's more likely to make me think of Mel Brooks than anything else. Can't turk him out of anything. It's just, and that really wasn't nice either. But that was Mel Brooks. That's his. That's the way he did things. He does things. He's still around. He should be well. And it's funny because I remember, we have a Norse pagan priest who's a big fan of Mel Brooks, and he says, oh, and Mel Brooks, he's a very Orthodox Jew. No, he's not. Right? If I remember, he was like teaching his tribe there, and he's telling them, Mel Brooks is a very Orthodox Jew. He's not, but he's very Jewish, right? And I don't know what to say. It's almost an hour that I'm talking. I really want this to be like a 2-second video to say, how do Jews see Jesus? How do Christians see Joseph Smith? That was my whole answer. But I like to hear myself talk, and I guess you like it too if you made it 52 minutes almost into this rambling nonsense that I've gone on with. But love you. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, certainly like, share, and subscribe. Let's continue this conversation. Make comments, and I'm happy to make more videos based on the comments that we have here. So thank you. And but I don't like to be disrespectful, as some of these people kind of in the comments here have been a little bit more disrespectful. Maybe from a Christian's perspective, I'm still being somewhat disrespectful. It's not my intention, but I admit sometimes I'm not perfect with that type of stuff. I mean, we're never perfect. Only God is perfect. I want to share just one story before I end. There was one of the great rabbis of the 20th century was Rabbi Solomon Halberstam, the Bobovit Rebbe. He used to actually pray in our synagogue when he was on vacation. It's before my time. I don't think I ever got to see him. I've seen his sons, over the years, and one son who passed away. And then Rabbi Halberstam, he was a Holocaust survivor, led a very large community in Brooklyn, and had followers all over the world, and a very influential and wonderful, nice person. And at his funeral, there was an African-American Christian fellow who was crying so much. He was a painter, and this is a story one of my teachers, Rabbi Weinberger, likes to tell. And people said, Jimmy, why are you crying so much? I said, I owe my whole life to the Grand Rabbi. And he said, he came to do a paint job in the Rebbe's apartment, and the Rebbets and the Rebbe's wife said, maybe he could do a little better here, there, and the daughters, they were kind of being hard on him, and then the Rebbe said, Jimmy, come over here. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. Only God is perfect. But you're doing a very good job. And I'm going to recommend you to all my friends. And that's how his business took off, right? Because it's such an influencer, how do you pronounce that word? Influencer. Before the internet, right? He passed away in 1999? 98 maybe? I know I was in yeshiva when the Rebbe passed away, so probably 99 or 2000. But, influencer, right? And he was able to accomplish, a great deal, both the heavenly realms and in the earthly realms. And, if you're trying your best and you love God and you walk with God in your own religion, however it is, you're not perfect, I'm not perfect, only God is perfect. But if you're trying, you're doing a very good job. And I want to encourage you to just keep on keeping on and just do a good job and serve God. Here I am, 25 minutes late for work, but I'm here. I live 80 miles away from this job, so it's not in the prison. This is another institution, but God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and I hope to see you all later. All right. This is way too long. How do I turn this thing off?